Welcome to Changing Higher Ed, a podcast dedicated to helping higher education leaders improve their institutions. With your host, Dr. Drumm McNaughton, CEO of The Change Leader, a consultancy that helps higher ed leaders holistically transform their institutions. Learn more at changinghighered.com. And now, here's your host, Drumm McNaughton.
Thank you, David. Our guest today is Julie Peller, Executive Director of Higher Learning Advocates, a Washington nonprofit that conducts policy analysis, provides expert testimony, and works to educate policymakers on key issues. Julie's an experienced professional with a deep background in federal post-secondary education policy, budgeting, and professional management. She's recognized as a leader on post-secondary issues and presents at a variety of forums on topics related to student achievement, federal policy, and student financial aid. Julie is particularly passionate about ensuring that policies support a post-secondary system that enables all of today's students, regardless of age, income, or background, to succeed and reach their goals. Julie joins us today to talk about their latest initiative, Widen the Path, and what higher ed institutions can do to improve their enrollment by embracing the precepts behind this initiative. Julie, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
Well, it's my pleasure. I'm excited to talk about what's going on with your Widen the Path initiative. You guys are doing some amazing stuff up there on the Hill.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We're trying to spread the message and make some change.
Well, and that's where it's got to start. You know, good luck up on the Hill, because the way things have been over the last few years, you're going to need it.
You know, it is slow and steady progress, but I think that our message is clear enough to get on both sides of the aisle. So hopefully we'll weather the new Congress this coming January.
I certainly hope so. So Julie, you know, as we get started, tell us a little bit about yourself, if you would.
So I am a creature of DC and all of that good and bad that comes with that connotation. But pretty much my entire career has been built around changing federal policy to make higher education better for who I now call today's students. And I've done that on Capitol Hill as a congressional staffer and philanthropy. And now I get this great opportunity to do it from an advocacy organization.
Well, that is really great. And, you know, that's a great segue. Thank you very much. I can tell this is going to be really good because you're giving all the segues here.
No problem.
You are the executive director for Higher Learning Advocates, which
Yes.
pretty much spells out what you do, doesn't it?
Yes, it was a pretty descriptive name, but in the world of DC and acronyms, we do often go by HLA. So sometimes I need to explain it.
Higher learning and then whatever the last, yeah, okay.
Yeah, right.
So tell us, what do you guys do besides advocacy? You know, do you have pet projects that you're working on?
Sure. So advocacy is a broad word, right? Ultimately, we're after change, and both changing the conversation and ultimately changing policy. So a lot of what we do is collaborating with people inside and outside of government in DC to ensure that we're talking about who's on college campuses today, how they're going through higher learning, both in colleges and other forms of learning, and how we can change the system to make it better for them. We do that in a number of ways, but a couple of our pet projects is we run and manage a coalition called the Today's Students Coalition that brings together just shy of 40 organizations that span student organizations, institution-focused organizations, and everywhere in between to agree on and take action and support today's students. Then you already mentioned our Widen the Path initiative, which is our other big project right now, which is a campaign to put plain language and storytelling behind this changing landscape of higher ed that those of us in the industry know so well, of micro-credentials and badges and short-term credentials and degrees. And how do we make sense of this for learners? How do we make sense of this for policymakers? And how can we make the system work better? So that's been a fun new initiative that we just launched this summer. And it's kind of a great creative exercise and a good chance to tell a good story.
Well, and it sounds like something that's truly needed to bring these organizations together. You've got some great things that are going on, but also higher ed needs some help at this point. So why are you doing what you're doing?
So, I think we see the need for change in policy that too many of today's students, too many learners are succeeding in spite of the systems that we have and in spite of the policies that we have. And the need for talent, the need for skills development and credentials to ensure economic mobility for people has never been higher. So those two things together, to me, create such an urgency that policy needs to catch up and really make that system better so that students aren't succeeding because of their own grit and ability to jump through hoops, but because the system's really actually designed for who they are.
Yeah. And I think that's an important point to bring out is most folks who have succeeded to this point, it's all due to their grit. There really isn't the support systems there necessary to help them raise up their economic stature.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, the fact of the matter is too many students are in a system that was designed for, you know, white men of 18, 19 years old, and they don't look like that anymore. They are first
Really?
generation learners.
You're kidding.
Really?
Students aren't
I
all.
mean, no disrespect to the white men on campus. They're certainly there as well, but there's so many students who are coming in with different backgrounds, different familiarity with the higher education system, which, let's be frank, is we all speak our own language, and that is not always transparent to people who have not been through it before. But also, students have needs outside of their life as a student, right? If you look at the 1 in 5 students that are parents, you look at the 80% of students who are working in some fashion, the number of students that are independent from their families, that is just it, I think, changes the equation of what supports a student needs in order to succeed in the classroom and manage their day-to-day life and all of the responsibilities that come with that.
Well, you and I, when we spoke a couple of days ago, we were talking about Russell Lowry Hart there at Amarillo College, who you know very well.
Yeah.
And Russell has done some amazing things with where he is down there and quadrupling the graduation rate, more than quadrupling the persistence rate. And it's because he's brought on campus the systems that these type of students need to be successful.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And he's doing amazing, amazing things. And, I think what he's done is looked at who's on his campus, what they need to be able to succeed, and bringing those things either on campus, or I've seen, other institutions offer things like drop-in childcare or counseling at 8 p.m. after their students' children might have gone to bed. Thinking about that student's life and the how the institution can fit into it rather than the other way around, we're really seeing dramatic changes for who have been too long marginalized populations.
Mhm. And universities traditionally have not been set up to take care of this type of demographic. And I think the figures, bear that out. We've got 39 million folks out there with partial degrees or some credits. We've got 64 million just with high school degree. They're not really being served by the current system, are they?
No, they're not. And we've talked so far a lot about their outside needs, but I think another part of the equation is how does higher education connect to their goals? That if somebody's really needs to get reskilled, upskilled, get kind of a new credential or a new set of skills under their belt, they might not have 4, 6, 8 years to finish a bachelor's degree to go get it. So how can higher education also support job and career advancement goals that go along with and are not always, it's not always college then career anymore. It's college and career all kind of mixed together. I think that's another thing that we're seeing with particularly those two populations that you mentioned, that they're stopping out not because they're not seeing the value, but because career is getting in the way, or there's a mini milestone that's happening in the middle there. So how do we keep them ensuring to be both on their work and learning journey at the same time?
And of course, the cost, comes into play as well. Higher ed is very, very
Absolutely.
expensive. And does it pay for itself? Yes, of course it does. But, there's still other things there. It reminds me about the difference between some of the Scandinavian countries and here in the US. When somebody loses their job over there, I remember seeing this on 60 Minutes or something, some of the news programs. We look forward to it because we know the government is going to train us to that next level of skills that we need to remain productive. And in the US, there's no government training for that. They'll give you money, unemployment, but that goes for maybe 6 months. There isn't that partnership between industry, between government, and between education to retrain the workforce or really even prepare students for the workforce.
Absolutely. And this is a place and why I love working in federal policy, as frustrating as it might be, but a place where you see that bear out in policy, right? In the workforce, and on the Workforce Investment Opportunity Act, which is the set of laws that really govern our kind of workforce investments. The incentives there are about getting people back to work, which I think is really good incentive. But too often that then means how quickly can we get somebody bare minimum skills to get them back into the next job, which really does not enable a resiliency and a building of skills for somebody to be on a career. It's getting them into a job, but not ensuring that if that job goes away, they're prepared for the next one, or that their learning and skills can translate to the next set of development and the next set of education that they need. We just have not incentivized the structures to really think about it that way.
Mhm. And with technology moving as quickly as it is, you cannot not go in and get retraining, but the amount of unemployment that they pay, et cetera, there's no real job training. When folks leave a job, it's like when they leave college. If the college closes or something like that, the chances of them coming back are very, very small. So
Absolutely.
it's one of those things that we need to change the way that the universities work. They've got to think about who their current student is. I mean, when we were talking the other day, we talked about it's not working for a lot of people. And you made a comment that really intrigued me. It was asking adults to repeat what they've already done. Let's talk a little more about that because that goes to the structure of higher ed.
Absolutely. So when you think about your students on campus being, you know, adults coming out of some level of work experience, some level of learning experience, that even though it may have not been obtained at an institution of higher education or within the system, I think recognizing those skills can go a long way to engaging the learners, accelerating them through a program faster, and kind of showing the path of how the next set of education really builds on what they've already learned. And so critical, I think, both on the financial side because you're accelerating and then it's less expensive, but also on the engagement and morale side. If an adult is coming in and saying, I don't need to, show that I can do these basic skills in this field that I've been working in for 15 years. I can take a credit for prior learning assessment or a competency-based course where I can accelerate that learning. You really can engage that learner much, much more.
Mm-hmm. And the other thing too is we've got a different generation that's coming into
That's
higher
right.
ed, Gen Z and whatever the next generation is going to be. Uh, I don't know. Has anybody come up for a word with that? I don't think so yet.
I'm not sure. I'll have to ask my 11-year-old.
Z
Maybe he's
plus?
found it on YouTube somewhere.
There we go. YouTube, it works better than some higher ed institutions. No, I shouldn't say that.
No, but YouTube is a good point about that next generation. We haven't even begun to really think about what the system needs to change. But those that generation is used to a la carte everything. That to get my children to watch a 30-minute television show versus a clip on YouTube is a struggle. How they're going to think about a 4+ year degree program is, I think, going to be very, very different because they're going to want to pick and choose and say, hey, this lecture series at this college down the street is really interesting and applicable to me. And then this apprenticeship program is also really applicable to me. Why can't I do both? Why
Hmm.
can't both come together for me? Because that's how I consume everything else in life.
And it makes perfect sense. The other piece with that is employers are saying that they're not getting the skills. They still think a 4-year degree is important, although many institutions, the state of Maryland being one of them, are no longer requiring a 4-year degree for employment at many positions. Google has not been doing this for a while now. But higher ed needs to do a better job of preparing graduates for the workforce. It's almost as though the purpose of higher ed has changed. Instead of it's being for the public good, it's for the individual to go out and find good employment.
So, I think it's always been a both and, right? Both things are important. I don't want to imply that it needs to be only job training or career training and the oftentimes what employers are looking for and why the degree is still kind of the coin of the realm is that critical thinking and engagement and citizenry and all those things that come with higher education. But I don't think we can assume that it has to be in either or that those things have to be in a consistent package where people cannot be learning I hate the term soft skills, but learning those
Yeah.
public good type skills, and you need a long period of time in order to get there.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing I think that institutions can do a better job for their learners, and we've seen a lot of advancement in this, right, is in giving people the language to articulate the things that they're learning. I graduated college at a time where I left with a such and such degree and I took these classes and I wrote this paper. But what employers want to see is I know how to, I was a political science major, so all soft skills, but I know how to analyze a problem and propose solutions and write effectively. Those are competencies that if we can give learners, and particularly learners who have not been through higher education or don't have family members to say, oh, yeah, no, this is really what you're doing. The language to say to employers, no, yes, this was a science course, but through that I learned analytical reasoning. That's a different conversation with a new employer than I got a B in science.
Yeah, I was a physics major. What can I do with that?
Exactly.
Yeah, I couldn't do math, but no, I'm just kidding. So that brings us back to Widen the Path and what the purpose of Widen the Path is. So when we spoke before, we talked about Widen the Path and what it is. Let's review that and go into what those solutions are that you guys are proposing, because I think it makes a lot of sense. And there's things that need to be done from a policy perspective, but also there's things that university presidents can be doing right now to help make education far more accessible. And oh, by the way, it might solve some of your enrollment problems too.
Exactly, exactly. So we're really after three sets of solutions through Widen the Path. The first is connecting higher education and workforce systems. So this is, to me, connecting the dots for the programs and the systems that are already out there. Wouldn't it be great at both a policy level and at an institution level if it's much easier for the workforce training system and the community college and the local regional university to integrate programs to make things make more sense as their learners in all three of those systems are coming in and out of all of them? The second is really doubling down and looking at that 39 million Americans that you mentioned before that have stopped out of school, and policy-wise, we make it incredibly difficult and incredibly expensive for them to come back. Too often, if they've stopped out because of academic performance or financial difficulty, they're not eligible for federal student aid, even if that happened 10, 15 years ago. So we need to take a look at pathways that we can get them back in. And then our third set of solutions is really looking at thinking about higher learning much more broadly than higher education. How can we recognize the skills that people have in different contexts? So things like opening up credit for prior learning and accelerating the use of that, opening up Pell Grants for some high quality, shorter term programs that can be a gateway to a further degree program. We need to be asking those critical questions at the policy level, and then kind of getting out of the way and enabling for institutions to create those partnerships to engage with their learners and really meet them where they are.
Mm. Well, the policy it's fascinating to me, but given what's been going on, I mean, we haven't had a Higher Education Act passed in over 12 years. And oh, by the way, there's a few things that have changed in those 12 years. We had a pandemic. We have far more online learning, CBE, you name it. I could probably name off 10 things that have changed significantly. How do you get that to happen? How do you get legislatures and the Department of Education to understand things have to change and then to be able to shift them? That's one. And the other is to get the buy-in from the accreditors and the universities to do this.
Yeah. So, I go back to what I started out with. I think the urgency it's an economic mobility question. In order to weather our changing economy after the pandemic and with the potential of a recession, we need to recession-proof our country and our most vulnerable people, which we saw again through the pandemic. Those without degrees are the ones who fared economically worse. And while that's an individual goal, it certainly is a public good goal as well. I think we are certainly not in an era of broad-scale reauthorizations. We may see some sort of activity along those lines, but for too long we've said, okay, reauthorization is not going to happen, and we need to wait for that broad-scale reform. We don't need to wait. There are things that we can do now in both policy and at institution levels. And that is the message that I and my team bring to the Hill quite often of, yes, a full-scale reauthorization, a full take step back and look at the system as a whole would be wonderful. But in the meantime, we can talk about things like credit for prior learning. We can talk about resetting satisfactory academic progress for returning students. We don't have to wait for that broad scale thing to make incremental and meaningful change in the meantime. And I think that that's really where we can start the ball rolling on some change.
That would be really important. I know starting to see that with respect to transcripts, and students who owe money in the past, owe money to a school, could never get a transcript to transfer to another school. And now there's many states who are actually coming out and saying, no, you cannot do this any longer. If a student needs a transcript, provide them a transcript, which makes far more sense because you've got much better chance of getting that money repaid if they get a degree, et cetera, et cetera.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, often those fees owed are for the institution, not very much, but for a learner or for an individual without a degree can really stop them in their tracks.
Mm-hmm. And so what can university presidents do at this point to widen the path?
So I think two things. First and foremost, take a hard look at who's on campus and who's not on campus, who's in the community, particularly for public institutions, but I think private institutions as well, who's in your target community to serve that's not coming on campus and why. And then think about the programs like Dr. Hart has done of how can you just make sometimes seemingly small changes in supporting students outside of the classroom in order to get them success in the classroom.
I'm going to interrupt you for just a minute. When you say who's not showing up on campus, what do you mean?
I mean that 39 million, some college, no degree.
Okay.
Right? If you are a metropolitan serving institution, either as a community college or as a four-year institution, who is not coming through your doors, and what are the barriers that are keeping them out of there? We know that there's a desire for a college education. There is still that motivation that we see in surveys and in conversations with people, but finances and timing and support services and culture can often keep people out of the door. And so while these policy changes, and those of us in DC are having those conversations, I think there's a lot that can happen just to make the culture more welcoming and ensure that the services are there for students.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, because last time I spoke with Russell, he said that they had 99 students in one of their terms, a couple of terms back, due to the pandemic, go homeless.
Yeah.
Only one person dropped out because they were able to provide the services with their connections to the community to make sure everybody stayed in. I mean, that to me that's beyond amazing. That's just incredible.
That is amazing. And that brings me to the second thing that I think institutions can do right now is forging connections and partnerships with the community services that are already there, figuring out how to share data and help students that are maybe low income and eligible for means tested programs, connecting them with those services. And the institution doesn't always need to be the one to be the human service agency, right? They don't need to be filling that need, but they can play a really big role in connecting the learner there. Same thing with employers. They can be sure that there's an open conversation, that their programs are providing and preparing their learners for the jobs that are in the community, and vice versa. If the employers understand more of what the institution's doing, they may be more likely to hire learners coming out of that program. And that relationship can foster a lot of innovation, but also a lot of transparency.
Yeah. One of the, and kind of interesting point, sidelight there, is one of the things I'll recommend when I'm working with an institution to help them build enrollment, their strategies, et cetera, is, you've got a lot of folks out there who are potential enrollment for your university. How are you connecting with the employers to create that seamless transition for them? It's so important that is there. And one of the things I recommend is university presidents, deans of business or whatever program, create an advisory board of your local business leaders who can tell you exactly what it is they need. They're not your board of directors or board of trustees, they're advisors, but they can be invaluable in helping you figure out the enrollment keys.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, also in that conversation, thinking about the employees of those employers as potential students, right? It's not just a one-way street anymore where the institution's providing candidates for employment, but the employer has a set of people who want to and need to continue developing their skills, and the institution can do that. And so it's really should be much more of a symbiotic back and forth relationship, because people aren't just kind of going through that linear path anymore.
And we see Arizona State doing this quite a bit, creating programs for lifelong learning, which, as much as I don't like buzzwords, I like that one, because frankly, If someone depends on the skills that they learned only in college, then they're going to get left behind. They need to continue that learning throughout their career and their life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And they need different things at different times,
Mm-hmm.
right? That it may be a degree pathway at one point and a credential or a certificate or a certification at another. And we shouldn't just assume that it is kind of a associates to a bachelor's to a master's to a PhD, and certificates are a separate thing in a whole other system, that people are really pulling things together through that lifelong learning.
Yeah, I read something this morning and it just blew me away. I don't remember where I saw it, but in counting credentials right now, there are over 1 million credentials in the US alone. 1 million credentials.
Yeah, it's an amazing, good friends over at Credential Engine do that assessment every year, and what they're trying to do and building is putting kind of taxonomy behind that. How do we take that million and make it make sense for states, for employers, for individuals, and say this credential can do X, Y, and Z, and I know these 10 providers do that, because that landscape, it is the Wild West. But if we can start categorizing it, hopefully we can make some sense of it. And Credential Engine is doing a lot of work along those lines.
Mm-hmm. As is Accredible, Danny King's group, where they're taking the transcript, and instead of just listing courses, credits, grade, whatever, they're listing the learning outcomes. This is what a student who went through this course did. And it's not only through the university, it's all the credentials that they take. All of these things just add to it. And that one thing, I think, would change how employers hire people.
Absolutely. And it changes, it goes back to that point of, it gives individuals the agency and the language to be able to say, I know how to do this. Look, it's verified and demonstrated by this system, which is incredible. And professionals do this in interviews all the time. Why are we not giving people early in their career or while shifting a career the same language?
Exactly. So, Julie, this has been wonderful. I really appreciate the time. 3 takeaways for university presidents and boards.
I think looking at who's on campus, making seemingly small but really meaningful to your learners changes, and look around in your community and who's already doing the work to serve the people you want to serve.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. Those are great takeaways. It's what we're talking about in many respects is a fundamental change to the way higher education works. It's not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, but it's looking to make it more acceptable, adaptable to the younger generations.
Right. And not even the younger generations, but the older generation that's living in a new economy. That as employers and the workforce is changing, higher education needs to change along with it.
Exactly. What's next for you? What's next for higher learning advocates?
So, as we go into the new Congress in the new year, we are really focusing on this Widen the Path campaign. How can we bring partners together? How can we lift up voices of both learners, institutions, and community members who are doing this, and bring that story to Washington so that we can make change?
That's great. Well, I wish you all the best in that. What you're doing is so important, and let's stay in touch. As you know, I'm fascinated by all the policy stuff, and so thank you.
Well, it's fun. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for this conversation.
Thanks for listening today, and a special thank you to today's guest, Julie Peller, and for her sharing with us her thoughts on how higher ed institutions can grow enrollment through embracing the precepts behind HLA's Widen the Path initiative. Our next guest is Dr. Stephen Katsouras, President and CEO of the Come to Believe Foundation and Network in New York City. Stephen is the former president at Arrupe College at Loyola University Chicago, and while he was there, they broke the mold for 2-year completion rates for associate degrees. 50% versus the national average of 13, the 3-year rate of 70, and 90% of these students graduating with zero debt. Stephen will join us to talk about how institutions of higher ed can make it work for low-income and first-gen students, and how you too can get these same numbers at your college or university.
Changing Higher Ed is a production of The Change Leader, a consultancy committed to transforming higher ed institutions. Find more information about this topic, along with show notes on this episode at changinghighered.com. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe to the show, and we would also value your honest rating and review. Email any questions, comments, or recommendations for topics or guests to podcast@changinghighered.com. Changing Higher Ed is produced and hosted by Dr. Drumm McNaughton, post-production by David L. White.